I was about to say good afternoon, but we are a fraction early. But given that we have a full house and it's just before lunch, I think it might be worthwhile getting started. Welcome. My name is Jeremy Nabarro from Cornerstone, and I'm here just to talk for a short while on the subject of love learning, love sharing. And the reason I'm going to talk about this is that it's based upon a book by Charles Jennings. Anyone heard of Charles Jennings? A few people, hopefully. Charles is well known and associated with the 70-20-10 thinking and initiatives. And he's written a series of these kind of mini booklets with Cornerstone on different topics. The first one was called Love the Way You Learn. The second one is called Love Learning, Love Sharing. And so I'm just going to touch upon a couple of those topics, but then also talk to you a bit about what Cornerstone as an organization is doing with our clients in the realm of collaborative learning and sharing learning. So it's only going to be a short session. I'm not going to try and cover the 30 pages in this particular booklet, but it is available from our stand, the Cornerstone stand, just over there, is number 9, I believe. So feel free to go and get a copy of that. It's really insightful, a good little read. Charles's book really, and lots of what he talks about is basically the premise that as humans we are a social species. And what he means by that is we like to socialize, we like to share experiences, we like to give feedback, we like to collaborate with other individuals, we like to speak to other individuals, we like to build networks. And all of those really are ways that we tap into a wider source of knowledge and learning beyond just a formal didactic form of learning. It's about actually getting feedback, being interactive, and as a human species, these are things that come really naturally to us. So it's kind of weird in a way that historically learning has very much not tapped into these things. Historically, learning has been predicated upon the delivery of learning, whether it be face-to-face or whether it be through e-learning. And what we haven't tapped into from a technology perspective is how do we facilitate that informal collaborative spirit of learning in a more effective way. So from a learning perspective, it seems to make sense that collaborating is of value. But as learning and development professionals, it's also worth thinking about what is the return on investment of these kinds of activities to the organization. So the Corporate Executive Board conducted a study which really looked at the impact of a number of collaborative on-the-job learning programs across a number of organizations. And that particular study effectively summarized that the impact of collaborative learning on employee performance was 300% more than traditional methods of learning. And on engagement, that figure was up by about 250%. So the report summarizes what we already think we know from gut instinct, which is that collaborating with individuals, with your peers, with people and experts and subject matter experts, sharing knowledge and collaborating in that way is a really powerful way of getting people engaged in what they do in their jobs and delivering effective learning to help improve their performance. So that's not only echoed elsewhere in that study, but also by Burson. I'm sure you all read a lot of Josh Bursin's work, and really he states that the organizations with a strong focus on informal learning capabilities not only deliver more effective learning and drive up engagement and performance in the ways we talked about, but they're actually more likely to excel at global talent development than organizations who don't focus in those areas. And so there's a lot of detail that sits behind these, which is interesting to read, but I think what it does stress is that sharing and collaborating is one of the richest forms of learning and development that we can tap into. And so the question is, how can we, as learning and development professionals, tap more effectively into those types of capabilities? Surprise, surprise. The answer may be partially in technology. Obviously, social is a word I think is very loaded within the corporate world. Historically, people have been quite scared of social. They have visions of people just tweeting all day at their desks or on their phones, Facebooking and sharing silly pictures and videos. But I think for us at Cornerstone, it's about understanding that social is actually something we do as a species. So we can tap into that vein of communication, then maybe we can more effectively help facilitate those processes. And so, not just with millennials, although you'll hear lots of talk about millennials expecting these kinds of tools, but increasingly, my dad's 72, he is addicted to his iPad. He is heavily social. He's a septuagenarian millennial, perhaps. So more and more we are mobile, we are using multiple devices. I have 2 laptops, an iPad and 2 phones, and I use them all at different points of the day for different purposes. So how can we use those tools in an effective way to bring people together a bit more? And back to the point I was making about people being scared of social. I think what we have to bear in mind is that for the majority of us now, this is stuff that's embedded into our daily workflow. How many people looked at their phone this morning on the way here and checked Facebook or Twitter? I was expecting 100%, but we weren't far off. And I imagine that's an activity that you may do depending on your attachment to those kinds of tools. You may well do that several times a day or at particular times of the day in the evening. So these are things which are familiar to us. So back to this idea of experience and sharing and collaborating and networking. If these are things we're already embedded into our workflow from a personal perspective, it's not so alien for an individual to engage in those things in a work perspective if the tools are there to tap into that. So things like commenting, sharing. People like to share. The whole explosion of social media is because we like to share things. We like to give our opinion and comment on things. We like to share silly things with our friends or things we're passionate about. And those things ring true in your work environment as much as they do in your personal life, I think. So we're familiar with trending, with liking, with sharing, with commenting, with following. How many people follow different groups in LinkedIn, for example? How many people follow individuals because they have something interesting to say? Yeah, it's part of what we do. So Cornerstone really is about trying to help organizations tap into that from a technology perspective. Now, it's not something that happens overnight in many organizations, but we should remember that people are doing these things today in their personal lives, so that leap is not really quite as big or quite as far as we may think it is. So what I'm going to talk about really is just a few of the ways that some of Cornerstone's technology is focused more and more about driving and facilitating that collaborative experience. So I'm going to show you a few things live, and we're going to do it really a little bit of a scenario to bring it to life. So there's a lady called Ella. She's working for a retail organization. She has joined as a new area manager. And like many of us, on her way to work, she may be checking her phone personally, but she may also use it in a productive way to check in with work or to catch up on some things she needs to do. So mobile is important. Also about how she can manage and utilize that technology on the job. If you look at the corporate executive board data, it looks at not just informal learning, but on-the-job learning and training. And so how can we use technology in that environment as well? And then also, maybe she's back in the office, she's using a desktop, she's using a different environment. How can she engage with those tools in a different way? So, bear with me a moment while I just reconfigure my pod over here. So, first things first. Fantastic. So, iPad here. So Ella's on the train. She was looking at photos of fluffy cats and things like that, and then she may have realized that there was some important things she needed to do for work. She's new to the organization, so if she logs on, this is logging on to Cornerstone's mobile app, which you can use for iPads, phones, Apple or Android devices. And when she logs on, she's got some activities. She may have some notifications or things which she needs to do. But she also can quite easily tap into a number of tools which can help her get up to speed better to understand the team of people that she's managing and working with. And one of these is an activity stream. And if you think about Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, we're used to this now of seeing a stream of activity of people that we're connected with or following. And so in this case, in Cornerstone, Ella has access to see what her team are doing. So no more running a report to see what your team are doing. Very quickly here, she's able to see, for example, we'll come back to this topic of gamification and badging and giving feedback. She can see that Alan is someone in her team. He's given her a badge. She's able to like that if she wants to. So again, the kinds of workflows and behaviors we're used to when we use social tools like Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn are embedded here. So it's an instinctive activity for me to do. I can also see actions and activities that other people have done. So like when I log into Facebook, I can see activities that people have done and gigs they've been to, events they've attended, holidays they've been on, etc. In much the same way, I'm able to see my team, I'm able to see what they've been up to in terms of their learning activity and any comments they may have. Ella's on her way to a new store. She's new to the organization, so she doesn't really know everybody in her team. So one of the things she may want to do is tap into understanding who her team is. And straight away she can start to see on the left here are people who report into her, so we know who her team is, we know who the people are that she's going to be collaborating with and working with, and she can very easily start to see, for example, here's Ryan, and much like a profile within LinkedIn or Facebook, I can already see a bit of background about his personal summary, his profile, what skills he has, and maybe even interests that he has. This is the thing we're seeing more and more. This is not just tapping into your professional interests and skills, but there may be things that you have accumulated in previous jobs outside of work, which you can utilize and leverage within the workspace. So the ability to share things like your interests could eventually be something that's quite useful to tap into. So she can see people in the team here. She can look at various information about these individuals. But the other thing she may want to do is to overcome that initial problem we all have when we meet a new team, which is you get introduced to a whole group of people, shake everyone's hand, you say hello, and as you walk away, 2 minutes later, you've forgotten everyone's name. I'm sure everybody has that at some point. I have it all the time. And so one of the things which we think is really important is onboarding and getting people productive is not just about giving them learning to do. It's about actually helping them network and connect to people in their teams to understand who is that guy in the corner of the office, who is that person that I met but I can't remember their name. And so we've just gamified that experience. Very simple tool called Do You Know? And it's a game. So gamification, again, doesn't have to be a scary activity. So Ella is presented with her manager, but she can select other people in the organization. It's Nigel, pretty serious looking guy. So she can then click play to start this game. And what it does is it looks at the hierarchy in Cornerstone, looks at the people who report to Nigel, and then asks Ella if she knows who these individuals are, because we've got pictures of them. So, nice smiley looking guy. I think I know who that is. Is that Mike? No. Maybe that's George. Okay. It's a simple game, but it's a very effective way of just identifying people that you may have met, or the guy who sits in the corner of the office and doesn't say hello, at least starting to find out who are these individuals and who are the people who are your peers effectively. So it's a way of getting people up to speed a lot more within the organization. And so just a very simple example of gamification. It doesn't have to be scary. I think that's Henrietta. And I think that is Fiona. So just a simple way that a tool can get engaged in helping you to be more productive and in networking. We tapped into the idea of social networking in its broadest sense. It's a really powerful source of tapping into knowledge and experience. Isn't that why we come to these events? Some of it is about learning in these formal sessions. A lot of it's about meeting your peers, your colleagues, new people to find out what they're up to. And this is a way to help you find out people within your organization. So the other thing she may want to do is to perhaps look at taking some learning. So again, she can very easily take learning. Thank you. Thanks very much. She can look at the learnings available to her. Because she's traveling a lot, we need to make sure that it's something that's very mobile. So she's already had some learning pushed out to her. We've got different types of learning on the left-hand side there that she can access. This is about handling stress in the most effective way. So she's on the train's late, hasn't got a seat, she's feeling pretty stressed. Maybe this will help her minimize some of that and help her deal with it better. So this is just a simple example from one of the content partners that Cornerstone works with. I'm not going to go through the course, but it's, again, a simple idea that with just an internet connection and a mobile device, she can start identifying people in her team, what their backgrounds are. She can identify individuals that she may be working with in the future and collaborating with. She's also able to take some learning very, very easily from that same device, all while she's on her way to work. The other thing she can do, I'm not going to go through this now, but is she can also take this offline. So it's very easy with Cornerstone to take mobile-ready content, download it to your device, and then take it again at the time of your choosing. Anyway, I'm not going to sit and wait for that to download. But going back to our scenario, Ella's finally got to where she needs to, which is the new store that she's managing. And one of the things that she needs to do is not just to look at what training people have been through, but she also needs to think about how they're actually implementing that on the job. If you remember, the key thing in that corporate executive board data was they looked at informal and on-the-job learning. So how can you embed that much more within that experience? And so one of the things that she may want to do is, on the job, within a store, within any environment she needs to, observe somebody going through certain activities. So this observation checklist idea works in many different industries, not just retail, in engineering, in manufacturing, where you need to assess somebody on the job. You see them do it. You ask them to perform a particular activity. And so this is a very simple way that I can go through and assess on the job Ryan's capabilities. Does he actually know what he's talking about? He may have attended the training course, he may have passed a test. Is he implementing that for real on the job? So this is a way not just of taking a competency assessment in a sterile, closed environment. This is real on-the-job assessment and observation. And that can be observations, it can be simulations, it could be demonstrating things, really whatever you choose it to be. Once she's happy that she's observed him going through some of those activities, she may then decide that she wants to give him some feedback about the work that he's been doing, because he's actually really implementing a lot of the things they've been learning. He's going in the extra mile for his customers. So she can also then give some feedback to him. And so one of the other things we find more and more is that giving feedback, not just in an annual performance review, but in something which is on a more regular basis. People today in social media don't necessarily want to have feedback on a 6-monthly or annual basis. They want feedback in a 6-minute basis or a 6-hour basis. That's the kind of experience we have in our personal lives. So giving people the tools to provide more timely feedback and more valuable feedback is another valuable way of tapping into that collaborative networking and feedback-driven approach. So she's going to give some feedback here, she can give him some commentary, but she may also decide that she wants to give him a badge. Badges are a bit of a Marmite thing, I know. You either love it or hate it. Some organizations raise a wry smile, as I can see a few people in the room, but we're seeing it more and more now in many of our social experiences, whether we earn badges and points in very different things. If anyone uses Strava, for example, anyone uses a Fitbit and some of the Nike apps for that, it becomes quite addictive. And so giving feedback and giving badges is really one way that we can give feedback and motivate individuals. So you can create your own badges in Cornerstone. They could be your values, things of that nature. You can link them into employee recognition programs. And when she's happy with that, she can give him some feedback. That's also then going to be shared with his manager, with his peers and connections. So it's tapping into that social aspect of giving feedback in a more timely manner. Right, I'm going to pause on that one for a second. And we're going to go back to our scenario, hopefully. So Ella is now there we go, fantastic. She's back at the office, so she may also not want to be sitting looking at her tablet or phone the whole time. She may want to log on to a laptop. And so one of the things that she can also do is access Cornerstone in this way. Cornerstone's really configurable. We've got over 2,600 clients, and so from small to large, different industries. And each one of those organizations is using the same version of the software and the tools available, which means they have to be able to configure it to reflect their brand, their processes, their terminology, their culture. So this is just an example of how you might want to make Cornerstone look, but it looks different for any client. So one of the things that she may want to do here is go to look at learning that she's going through. She is a new manager, so she's going through a manager onboarding program. And so one of the things we always wanted to tap into is think about how we can align programs of blended learning with collaborative learning as well. Particularly if I'm going through onboarding, management development, a particular certification or program of learning, it's quite likely that I might be part of a cohort who are going through that together. And we maybe have some group activities where we need to collaborate and do things in that way. So this learning program gives me access to not just the learning that's available for my manager onboarding program, but a community where we can exchange and collaborate. And again, tapping into some of the social capabilities, we can choose to feature certain postings or activities, and that's, if you like, a push. So as an instructor or a moderator, I can push out content to my community of people. Equally, we're becoming more familiar with the concept of trending. On Twitter and on Facebook and on LinkedIn, we see the hot topics, we see what's trending. So one of the concerns that organizations I've spoken with have about these kinds of communities and collaborative capabilities is that, are they going to be overwhelmed by low quality content? Are people just going to be posting rubbish? And that's definitely possible. So there's two ways to counter that. One is give moderators and subject matter experts control to moderate those communities so they can surface and push out and feature content if they need to. On the other side, trending in a way is its own, the cream is rising to the top, in the articles and the content that people find most valuable are the ones which are most accessed, and therefore those are the ones that get promoted naturally via that trending process. So actually, these kind of social capabilities we're used to, again, in Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook, etc., can be materialized in a learning community context. So Ella's able to also see the people who are communicating, the other members of her team, who has been contributing the most. So again, gamifying it with the concept of leaderboards if she needs to. If she wants to drill down and look at a particular topic, she can drill down to look at information that's been shared by people who are collaborating with her. She can like that if she chooses to. It can be tagged if you choose to. And like you can do in any of the social tools we use ourselves, you're able to follow topics or postings. You can follow individuals. And again, that's a way of tapping into networks and tapping into communities. Okay. So the other thing Ella might need to do as part of her program, if we go back up to the top, is to take some learning. So as well as the collaborative learning capabilities, there's also a blended learning aspect to all of this as well. So you can create any structure you like of a blended learning program within Cornerstone. This is just an example of the kind of thing, when I joined the organization on day one, I had my own access to our own instance of Cornerstone, and I had a whole load of work to go through straight away. I was being productive and I was learning about the organization. So this can be any structure you choose. It can be any type of learning object. It could be something just as simple as some video you want to include. The thing with video is it's obviously very quick to create. The quality can sometimes be variable, but sometimes it's just one directional. So one of the things that Cornerstone's also tapped into, this is just a video I pinched off YouTube actually, so you can just link to content that already exists. You don't have to own it or even buy it. You can link to stuff that's in the public domain. But as well as being able to play learning, if you look on the right hand side, you'll notice shortly when we get there that you're also able to start posting commentary and have interactions. I'll pause my video there for the moment. And what that gives you is the ability to then not just push content out there in terms of video content, but also facilitate a discussion between people who are taking that content. And that can be a threaded discussion. And again, if you've got moderators or subject matter experts, they can facilitate that process. So all I've got here is a very simple piece of video, but we're making it interactive. We're making it dynamic by having a discussion that's going on in real time. The comments are timed, so they can be at relevant points of that content as well. Okay, just a couple more things I wanted to show you about how some of the tools that Cornerstone has to tap into that social and collaborative imperative. I'm going to close this down. The other thing that Ella may wish to do potentially is to identify some learning. She's had some learning pushed to her, but she also wants to find some learning which might be relevant to her. And again, one of the things we find with our online experiences today is that particularly if we use tools like Amazon or eBay or even Facebook, where you get the scary ads that are suddenly surfacing something that you looked at 2 minutes ago. The technology knows a lot about our habits and the things we're interested in. So one of the things we try to do within Cornerstone is to get more intelligent and smart about how we can identify what kind of learning people are interested in. So that can be topics which are specific to me as an individual, because I've previously specified an interest in those areas, so I can start pushing out content where relevant and marketing it even to individuals. But I can also do things like featuring, feature content and suggest content. And if you get a feel, this feels a bit like using Amazon, it's because Amazon is also a Cornerstone client, and they were very keen to replicate some of that kind of workflow and clickstream that people are used to with Amazon. So the 5-star rating scale again is a way of surfacing the most popular user-generated content. So it's tapping into what does the network of people think about this particular content. So in this case, there's a TED Talk that I'm interested in. Cornerstone has a partnership with TED Talks. I'm able to look at information about that particular video. I can see how it's been rated. And if I want to, I can just go ahead and launch that directly. I'm not going to go through and launch some content, but what I am going to do is just very quickly show you, once you've completed learning in the system, the other thing now is also getting people to interact a bit more about what might happen next. And so we can also start to link, from a gamification perspective, badges and points to learning outcomes. And any of you who have used tools like Khan Academy, for example, that is a very fundamental part of their learning process, is about motivational and guiding aspects throughout your program of learning. So I can see now I've attained something, I've attained some points. And a lot of clients I talk to are looking at ways of how they can tap into these capabilities for motivating learners in a more virtual world. Does anyone use Strava here, by the way? A few people. Strava's it's an online tool for tracking running, cycling, things like that. As well as tracking your progress, it also compares your progress to other people who have ridden the same street or route or run the same route. And it becomes really scarily competitive if you're that way inclined. But there's a really interesting discussion with the guy who founded Strava. He used to be a professional rower. And he said one of the big motivations for training every day, getting up in the morning, was the camaraderie of being with a group of people and the banter and the feedback and the congratulations and all of those things. And so what he said he wanted to tap into is when he moved away and was just running and cycling for his own pleasure. He wanted to tap into that collaborative, slightly competitive in a friendly way, network of people that he worked with. And so I think gamification in learning context is very much about using it in a way to motivate and to guide learners in a way. So Ella can also go here. She can go and see a leaderboard of learning. So many organizations, particularly for new hires, are using this as a way to drive engagement in that critical onboarding period. So Ella can see a leaderboard of how she's stuck up against other people within her team, and she can then filter it by different time periods or filter it in different ways. So you can associate points with learning completion and points with badges as well. So the final thing I wanted to close on really was just closing that loop around feedback. We saw when Ella was in the store and she'd given some feedback to Ryan, who she'd assessed on the job. She gave him some feedback. One of the things that she also wants to tap into, and many of you will be familiar with the case studies around Deloitte, Accenture, and the death of the performance review. I think when you delve into the detail on a lot of those case studies, what you find is that what they're really doing is trying to enable more ongoing and continuous feedback, particularly in a world where you're maybe not working in the same physical location as your colleagues all of the time. And so certainly in my role at Cornerstone, I'm home-based. I see my colleagues from time to time, but quite often we interact in a virtual way. And so feedback is a really critical part of what we do. And so the ability for me to ask for feedback and solicit feedback is equally as powerful as tools to give it to me. So I can very easily, maybe after a presentation after today, I may ask my colleagues to provide me with some feedback. And so the feedback tool here shows me feedback that I may have previously received, but I can also select individuals that I'd like to get feedback from. And then I can ask them questions about the feedback that I'd like them to give me. So rather than just asking for some general feedback, perhaps I'd like to ask Alan, in this case, some specific questions about the particular project that we worked on or the activities that we did. So I'm going to ask Alan for some feedback, and I can then ask a question. Just a simple bit of structured feedback. How do I want him to respond to that? Do I want to just a yes or no? Is it a rating scale of some kind? And then I can share that with Alan now, and so he's going to be asked to give me some feedback. And so I think one of the things we're also saying is that back to our original premise around humans being a social species, what we're really trying to do is to tap into these kinds of elements of how we learn and to provide technologies and tools to help us do that. And so feedback is very much one of those. We talked about conversations, taking learning online, obviously, and different facilities for deploying and taking that learning, but also creating networks and allowing people to interact and share content in a productive way. So that was really, hopefully, just a quick whistle-stop tour of some of the key themes that I thought were relevant in that Charles Jennings Love Learning, Love Sharing booklet, which you can get from stand number 9, just over there from the Cornerstone stand. I hope that was a useful summary, some useful insights. Please feel free. The Charles Jennings book is there. There's also a recent study we've conducted with IDC, which is called Future People, particularly around people management within the UK. So some interesting findings from that as well. Thanks for your time. Enjoy your lunch. Thanks.